To the surprise of absolutely nobody, the Munster Hurling Championship started with two explosive encounters on Easter Sunday. Cork were well on their way to justifying their pre-championship hype as they ran up a 12-point half-time lead in Ennis, but the All-Ireland champions refused to yield in a stunning comeback that left the Rebels needing a last gasp free to snatch a draw. Somehow, Tipperary and Limerick's battle in Thurles matched the intensity of the opener, with Liam Cahill's men copying Cork and slotting a free at the death to give us two draws from two games in Munster. Meanwhile, in Leinster, Kilkenny dominated Galway to lay down an early marker, while there were also opening wins for both Dublin and Wexford. All that leaves us with plenty to discuss on today's episode of Indo Sport. Will Slattery here with you, and I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Colm Keys. Colm, how are you?
How are you, Will?
Doing very well, thanks. And on the line by Eddie Brennan. Eddie, how are you?
All right, lads, you well?
Very well after that weekend of hurling, and just a reminder that
recovered.
Yeah, just about recovered. Thankfully, we had the bank holiday Monday just to pace ourselves now to get into today's chat. But just a reminder that our GA coverage on the Indo Sport podcast is with thanks to AIB. AIB is at the heart of Gaelic games across both club and county, and in 2025 they're celebrating a decade of sponsoring the All-Ireland Senior Football Championships. With this year's championship shaping up to be one of the most competitive in years, AIB is more excited than ever to bring fans closer to the action. Check out #TheToughest for more. And Colm, I saw in your piece today you wrote that Sunday's doubleheader was arguably the best two matches we've had back-to-back in the Munster Hurling Championship, it's a pretty high bar to have to clear. And Eddie, I think you spoke for a lot of us after the opening game when you tweeted, "Sweet suffering Jesus H. Christ, what a game of hurling." And you could have probably posted that again after the second one. It was just a phenomenal weekend, a phenomenal day. Somehow the Munster Hurling Championship overpromises and overdelivers. It just, all the superlatives you throw at it, it still matches up to the hype, Eddie.
Absolutely, it was a brilliant start. We had a slow start in the province of Leinster on Saturday. Not without impact either. I mean, there was always a heaven and hell aspect, I think, to the Kilkenny-Galway match, and the impact of that will be felt further down the line. But I'm not too sure many of us could have anticipated, how good, because sometimes in matches you get this arm wrestle, you don't get an enthralling spectacle that engages you as much. But I think both Munster Championship matches really engage you from a different perspective, because obviously Thurles provided a very wet and windy conditions. Ennis looked to be in better nick, but there was obviously a significant breeze there as well. But what we got was two incredible matches, and even just, if you for different styles, like you had Cork just threatening to explode into life, and that they did shortly after that. It's fair to say Clare looked a nice bit off the pace starting, and then you look at even, I know we'll get into it, but like the score, and like for Clare, 9 points in the first half, 3-11 in the second half. Could have been more. They had 4 different free takers. So I think all in all, I think Cork like 2-15, and then I think was maybe 8 points in the second half. So just such contrast really to what we got in both halves, and definitely the old adage or the old saying there of a game of two halves. But yeah, what a way to start off our campaign. I think it was probably a nice muted anticipation for us all. It was quiet enough in the lead into these matches. But by God, the hurling championship exploded into life on Sunday.
Yeah, Colm, it's like as if the Munster hurling gods refused to give us anything other than a classic, because even after 57 minutes before the Shane Barrett red card, Cork had weathered the storm. I think they were maybe 8 clear at that stage when the red card came, and then it just all took on a life of its own, and we got that absolutely frenzied, frenetic, frantic last 15 minutes or so with all the injury time as well. You were there in Ennis. Like, what do you make, a couple of days later now, how do you reflect on what you saw, why the game unfolded the way it did, and how Cork went from an unassailable lead, or so it seemed, to scrapping for their lives to get out of it with a point?
Yeah, to recap, as you said there, they got back to 9 points clear when Shane Barrett was sent off, and Shane Barrett can have no complaints. He bought what Clare was selling, and that was very, very much a step up in physicality and nuisance value, shall I say, as well, because there was flashpoints erupting everywhere. Players standing up to each other, a number of double bookings. Tony Kelly and Seamus Harnedy went into the book at the same time as Adam Hogan and Alan Connolly, who had a real battle now, even off the ball, quite often that rose to the surface, that particular head-to-head. So Cork got drawn into that. Very, very much drawn. Obviously, Clare stepped it up. They had to step it up. They went in 12 points down. they went in a shadow of themselves, of the team that resurrected themselves even after last year's Munster Championship, Munster final defeat, and went on to win the All-Ireland. That a team capable of bringing that close attention to opponents, that nuisance value. They stepped it up everywhere. There was confrontations everywhere. Cork dealt with it for a long time, but then Barrett was the fault line. No complaints from that point of view.
Yeah.
And they withdrew. Dara Fitzgibbon went back into a holding role. They retreated further back. Obviously, the wind was significant enough, and Clare were very content to put the ball in around Peter Duggan. Peter Duggan, who I thought had a magnificent game. Not so much for the ball that he was on, but the ball that he was able to direct and just prevent Cork from getting any foothold in that full back line. He really was a disruptive influence in there, and so much stemmed off him. He created a level of panic that other Clare forwards were able to thrive from. And that was the key to it. Clare were not afraid to put ball in on top around him. They were able to set up flashpoints everywhere around the field to disrupt that Cork rhythm. And eventually they got there. And really, I thought when Tony Kelly put the free over after the last goal from Duggan, the third Clare goal, I thought there was only one winner here. You'd have to say Cork did well, very well, to rescue a point from the situation that they found themselves. And I feel it would have been a real psychological blow had Cork left Ennis without anything, having led and dominated the way they did.
Is it a blow anyway, coming into the championship with the I suppose the hype, the swagger of putting Tipperary to the sword in the league final? Is even giving up the lead they gave up and getting a bloody nose, checking that momentum, is that still a blow?
Well, I don't think it's a blow to only come away from Ennis. They're All-Ireland champions. You have to absolutely respect that. And sometimes we can look too much into the loss of a player like Shane O'Donnell. I always go back to Kerry in 2014 in football. Colm Cooper was sidelined from February, and you think he's in the form of his life. What chance have Kerry really of making any strides in this football championship? And they end up winning it. So sometimes others can lift their game, others can take on a greater burden of responsibility and all of that. So getting a point, Pat Ryan said, if I got a point out of Ennis this morning, I'd have taken it. Well,
Did you believe him?
Probably not. But given the form they were in, they probably expected to take two. But one, on the face of it, it's still a return. But not when you're 12 points up at half time. That's where the real scar is. Could have been a worse scar, but it still probably is a scar nonetheless. But not the worst result from, because probably things were getting a little bit out of hand around the whole noise around Cork. I'm not saying they were high. Everybody, of course, Clare were hugely respected, and Limerick too. Limerick especially. Limerick are, capable of really stepping up again. But Clare get O'Donnell back. I know I've just said, well, they've been able to cope without him, but he would really be a catalyst for them later in the summer. And it looks to me now that Clare that point could be highly valuable in making sure that they at least get third place, but possibly one of the top two as well.
Yeah, Eddie, I'm sure there's a lot that you want to come in on there. Anything in particular that Colm said, or any of your own thoughts about Cork, why they ended up losing their lead, or Clare roaring back into it?
Yeah, I think they probably got a tiny bit spooked, I think, at times. I mean, Clare came out after half time, and I was sitting at home on the couch and looking at it, and I kind of said at one stage, I think Cork got it back up. I think they recovered. They initially coughed up 2-3 to 3 points just after half time. I mean, the first goal, I think that basically said, there's a little hint now this could be on. And I just kind of commented to the young lad with me. I said, Cork were on 20 points. I said, if Cork could hit 25, if Cork get to 25, they'll win this match. And they couldn't get to us. And that was the thing. The scores dried up. But Clare brought a kind of a Devil May Care attitude. And Colm said it there, that this sold this confrontation. And I've experienced that in Ennis a few times. They bring that edge, they test you every way. And at that stage, right, the hurling wasn't working because Cork were doing all the hurling. And in fairness, there was one thing left, and that was to get into their faces. And what they done was they distracted Cork ultimately. And Cork, as Colm quite rightly said, they maintained the focus for a little while. But I think the big one, and it's tough because when you're in those situations, sometimes you're taking a lot, you're shipping a lot. It's hard to keep the handbrake on. And like that's all for Shane Barrett. He just needs to go, I do not need to get involved in this. I do not at all need to get involved in this, no more than other little bits and pieces, because you're 9 points up. You're in a good position. The one thing you don't want to do now is give the opposition a glimmer of hope. And I will say straight up, there wasn't a whole lot in it, but there was a strike in action. It was completely unnecessary. And yes, David Reedy did play it up a tiny bit, but it wasn't David Reedy's fault. He was just, I suppose, chancing his arm a little bit and doing what all other players were doing. And like I said, Shane Barrett didn't need to do that. It ultimately gave Cork a fear factor, and they retreated, and they stopped doing what was good, which was carrying the ball up the field. And I just thought it allowed then Clare to take it. And sometimes when you have an extra body there, I think the key was that you kind of Cork for me didn't need to retreat. They brought almost back an extra man. So that meant that Clare had even the luxury of another body. So it took out Cork's ability to score completely. And even the substitutions, I thought Pat Ryan, right, he has a bench there that he runs, and we talked about the depth, but that bench returned him very little on Sunday. And I think, for me, maybe, and it's easy for me to say, but I did feel that withdrawing Patrick Horgan and Connolly, both of them, in close proximity, was possibly a mistake now. And to finish the point, really, it's only later on, Cork could have left Clare very, very wounded. Very much wounded, because Tipperary are now bouncing down to Páirc Uí Chaoimh on the back of that league defeat, and they should be able to measure Cork a little bit better this time. But Cork are potentially without Rob Downey now as well. Shane Barrett is gone. Rob Downey could be injured. He looked to be probably could have been taken at half time. So they're the little issues. And now you suddenly have two pillars of that Cork team taken out. Yes, they have strength and depth, but by God, it just puts a premium on the 7-day turnaround, and how something that looks to be based on form and everything, suddenly there's question marks. Suddenly there's a different challenge to the psyche of Cork. And I'm not saying they're done and dusted, or they're down and out or anything like that, anything but this result could be significant later on in the championship. And that is the cutthroat nature of the Munster round robin compared to Leinster. Whereas you look at what happened in Kilkenny, Galway can recover. There is scope to recover, but they have a body of work to do as well.
Yeah, like to the point about the Cork Tip match next weekend, like Cork 324, Tipperary 023. That was, it was the 6th of April, I think. So we were talking about, 3 weeks on. It looks like, is it a different complexion in your mind now, like going into this weekend? Tipperary getting that great draw against Limerick, a real back and forth battle. Looked like they had pulled away with the second John McGrath goal, but Limerick, like champions, came back, and it was a similar finish, as I mentioned at the top of the show, to the Cork game with the late free. But now all of a sudden this game, like Cork won by 10, but ought to probably have won by more if they kept the foot down on the pedal. Now all of a sudden there's a little bit of doubt.
I'm not sure there's that much doubt. Will I still put Cork, ahead of Tipperary and Páirc Uí Chaoimh? I think that's fair enough to say.
Yeah.
They've made it a fortress. People give out for so long about the building of Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and is it too much or whatever it is. Cork hurling is now filling that every time. There is no ticket available, and most of the people inside there, most of the 42 or 3,000, whatever it is it's holding now, will be wearing red. It's a cauldron there. It felt like a cauldron for the league final as well. It's a difficult place for opponents now to come, and I think probably the Limerick game looks like it flipped that last year, that it's become this mobilisation and movement. And I don't think, while there is a bit of scarring from Ennis, you would still say Cork have to be out in front here. But acknowledge, as Eddie's point about Rob Downey, who has been terrific for Cork at centre back, and also Shane Barrett. Shane Barrett's pace didn't get to show it, a few snatches of it early on. He could have had a goal in Ennis early on. But Shane Barrett running at the likes of Ronan Maher, yes, they're going to miss that. But they do have a bench. I mean, they've Shane Kingston there. I would actually agree. I thought that Patrick Horgan and Alan Connolly, Alan Connolly's 2 points, his second and third point, one from the sideline. He's going out near the he's going out near the terrace on the other side of Ennis. He's going the different direction for 2 of those points when he scores them. So I thought he was occupying the Clare full back line when he was taken off. I also felt Ethan Toomey was going well when he was taken off.
Yeah.
So, he was after setting a point up for Patrick Horgan, and he was, he's a powerful runner. He's really physically developed this year. He's a player who has really caught my eye. He got that goal in the league final too against Tipperary. It was really in that second quarter that Cork stepped it up against Tipperary. Out from that, it was a very even game. Looks like Tipperary have recovered well. You have to say they have recovered well from the league final to be able to go in and get a draw against Limerick in the conditions that were there. So they're going to be better going back to Páirc Uí Chaoimh. But I still think Cork have enough.
Yeah.
And I think that point is valuable in Ennis in the context of what they're facing now. Because if they win their home games against Tipperary and Waterford now, all they want is third place. I think that gets them into third place. So big game, but they do have replacements to come in to fill in for the players they may be missing.
Yeah,
it's probably a test of the real metal now, Colm. I think this is the one question that was the issue with Cork and we've seen that emerge this year. We've seen a different Cork this year, and that's not going to just evaporate on the back of one result. But it is because they could have very easily come out of Ennis with nothing the other day, and that would have been an awful blow. So I think if Pat Ryan is looking at it that way, he'll definitely stack the positive on that and say, look, lads, we just get back to doing what we've done already in our home patch. They should be good enough. And it's probably just a test of where they are as a group. You want the players to drive that on again this week and just say, look, lads, we've been here before in terms of a 7-day turnaround. We reset, we flush the system when we go again.
Eddie, I saw you tweet about the performance of both referees in maybe helping the spectacle over the weekend, and you, Colm, were writing about Thomas Walsh's decision at the end of the Tipperary Limerick game. I just want to get your opinions on how both those games were refereed. One thing as a spectator watching on television I found frustrating in the Cork-Clare game was the commentary team constantly talking about how good the communication was that they could hear, but that we couldn't hear on TV. They just kept talking every 2 seconds about these great interactions. It's like, play it for me, I want to hear it too. But obviously that...
I suppose just jumping quickly to both of them had a lot to deal with, because like Colm was talking about there, you had a lot of scuffles, you had a lot of things going on. And it was good to see that there was good interaction between all the groups. The linesmen were involved and they were helping them out. And that's what you want. That's what you want, is that you have your 7 people around that field helping out. I suppose just one point I'm going to make as well is I think it's important. We saw a few Hawkeye decisions in Thurles that in the absence of Hawkeye, what way do they go? And then you don't have Hawkeye in other stadiums. I think that's something that arguably needs to be looked at. And I know we're not going to solve it by bounce, but your season could ultimately be changed. And like you'd see for the officials, it's very hard sometimes to deal with a ball that flies over the crossbar, flies between the posts when you're in the wrong position. So did Hawkeye help get the decisions right in Thurles, which could have been pivotal at the end of that match? And then, there's other decisions. But in terms of refereeing, I thought the way Tyler dealt with the 6-3-3 inside at the start of the Tip and Limerick match, just went in, quick word, yes, there's rest, and yes, he understood the soften up at the start and all that goes with that. But I thought he dealt with it very practically and just was firm with it. Same with, I suppose, the same with Liam Gordon. He had a lot to deal with. There was an awful lot going on. And I just thought they done well. There was no rash decisions. And I think by and large, they got the vast majority of the calls right. The only one that you would say could have come up for a little bit of scrutiny was that only 6 minutes was played at the end of the Cork and Clare match. You could have justified probably 10. And yes, Cork, went a minute and a half extra before they got their equalising point. So I think it balanced out overall. But it was just how firm they were, their interactions. I think what I love to see with a referee is he's actually engaging it. If players are respectful with him, he engaged them back. And I thought both of them did that. They had the respect of all the players on the pitch. And they didn't they weren't condescending in how they interacted with players, which is what you want to see.
would just love to have gotten that insight that that they were talking about
Yeah, it
non-stop,
would have been,
because they referred
again,
to.
I share your thoughts on that. We'd all have loved to have been hearing that, and I think we're going to probably see it move towards that. But it's good. It's a positive thing, and they helped and supported each other, and that's what we want, because it's not fair that the sole responsibility falls on the man in the middle. It's good to see that there's a team in place there and that they're supporting each other.
Just on that, on the communication, I actually don't think we'll see it come in, because I don't think players would be comfortable with it at all. Obviously, the exchanges would be well filtered by the time the commentary and the co-commentary. That is an issue, because if you go back to the 2015 documentary on David Coldrick for the All-Ireland final.
Illuminating.
Yeah, really, really good. But there was objections
from
players.
17 as well.
Yeah, there was objections from players, because obviously they didn't know about it in advance that this was, and there was a lot of unfiltered chat there, quite a lot of unfiltered chat, and I think that's something that they would be wary of, and I think we would see opposition, as much as it would be a really great prop for the viewer to be able to listen to that. I think there would be prohibition there. In terms of what has really been said between the player and the referee, there certainly, if it was in Cork and Clare, if it was on view there was so much.
Just to jump in there, I'd say that's why he books Tony Kelly and Harnedy, that both of them were mouthing off at him a fair bit, and I think he kind of got sick of the two of them in his ear.
And Eddie, if that was football, that's obviously
moved up.
Ball moved up. So there's such a distinction now between the rules of hurling and football, even around the puck out. And I know the commentary team in RTE were talking about the swift puck out, that the players have to players have to be outside the 20-metre line, technically outside. In football, you don't have that now. The FRC have changed that. You can put the ball down on the tee, go as quick as you want. There is no restriction. So just to deviate ever so slightly, there are things that hurling can look at and adopt from the Football Review Committee. Small stuff like that in terms of dissent, because really football referees are finding it a lot easier to actually referee what they see in front of them without this constant chat from players contesting all the time. Because the minute they contest, they're gone 50 metres up, and players know that now, so they're backing away. They're not engaging like that. And I think if you were mic'd up for football, you'd hear a lot less than what you used to.
Yeah,
because they're pulling away from it now. They know that. So the introduction of that would complement the new to adopt the dissent rules in football. Yeah. Then you could probably introduce the mic'd up for them, because it'd be a lot less. Just on your Hawkeye point, Eddie, that's that's well made, but there's an economic and a practical element to that. That they at the outset, it was Croke Park and Thurles, because they are the two busiest stadiums in the country. The most games are going to be played there. Obviously, in All Ireland, a league hurling final is most likely to be played in Thurles. Okay, it was Páirc Uí Chaoimh this year. All Ireland hurling quarterfinals most likely going to be played in Thurles. It was, when it was introduced, it was to the cost of around $250,000. It obviously takes operation. There would be a lot of venues. You need to man them, obviously, and all of that. So it's an expensive business. I'm not sure if it's the most practical. You either have them there at those two venues because they're the busiest, or you don't have them at all. And I think it's better on the busiest. It's like speed cameras on a busy stretch of road. You're going to have them on the busiest stretches of road.
Yeah, so a few things to chew on there. It'll be interesting to see, as the mic'd up point that you mentioned there with football, kind of eliminating dissent for the most part. Is that a more ripe opportunity to let viewers know what's going on? Because it certainly would have added to the spectacle even more so at the weekend. Eddie, moving then to Tip Limerick, the second game of the day, 223 to 223, honours even at the end. Some brilliant goals too from John McGrath, like the Shane O'Brien finish into the roof of the net, even Adam English's little touch after that beautiful pass by Aaron Gallan. It looked like it had been a blocked shot initially, but the reverse angle showed an unbelievable bit of vision from Gallan. What were your big takeaways then? Obviously, as we touched on earlier, like Tip going in after a fairly chastening league final, Tip fans very much kind of unsure as to what to expect. Limerick, smarting after losing their All-Ireland crown last year. We were expecting a big bounce from them. To some degree we got it, but Tip refused to die and got a point at the end. What were your kind of big takeaways?
Yeah, well, it was. I think both sets of I suppose independent even of that as a neutral, you were very curious as to how it rolled up, and it looked as if that if Limerick turned up bouncing and in good form, having had a 5 week break, that based on Tipperary where they came from in the league final, that there could have been trouble. But to be fair to Tipperary, I think the pace at which they played at was a lot more. I'm looking at probably saying that maybe Limerick didn't play at the pace that Cork played as well. That we were looking at, well, what are Limerick going to roll out? They had a few tactical switches that possibly put Tipperary thinking straight away, and they've done that before. John Kiley has done that before by bouncing Kyle Hayes up into the forwards, Willie Donoghue back at centre back. So straight away they threw a couple of tactical curveballs at Tipperary. But I thought Tipperary coped very, very well with it. They seem to have, probably a little bit of soul searching too, and they seemed a bit more motivated, and body language wise, they were more at it. And to be fair to Tipperary, they probably broke down at times with maybe overpassing at times, but they were trying to do the right thing. And I think the conditions lended into that. But what we seen from Tipperary was when they were in possession of the ball and attacking at speed, by God, that second goal especially, like they walked that ball the full length of the pitch. And, John McGrath for me is a guy, I've seen him playing at club level. He's top quality at county. For me, probably 2016, he was threatening to be the next Shamie Callanan type player for Tipperary. And maybe that hasn't happened. But this is what he does in a game where he just, he doesn't have that speed. He doesn't have that type of play, but he has an intelligent hurling brain that not many have. And I thought particularly the first goal, the team effort for the second one was class. His finish was brilliant. But the first goal, the way he kind of took the position and then just looked as if he was going to kind of narrow the angle for himself and come in off his right. He just turned in and he opened up the whole goal to pick his spot, and he just passed it into the far side. And that's probably something that Tipperary had been maybe lacking a tiny bit in the last couple of weeks. They seemed to be shooting their points. Jake Morris was fantastic as well. When the challenge was thrown down, they needed to step up. But I suppose, again, I'm looking at the 4 goals. Shane O'Brien's one was just an absolutely brilliant finish. I'd like to think maybe Ronan Maher needed to rush him quicker and get to that angle. I sometimes don't understand why goalkeepers don't make themselves a little bit bigger. I think Barry Hogan was a fraction hesitant with both of them. You either commit hard or hold your ground. And look, that's been harsh on him maybe to a degree, but I just remember Brendan Cummins was a great man to actually rush at and make himself very big without committing a foul. He would narrow the angle. But I think we'd have to, you touched on it there, Will, the pass from Gillan. I only noticed it actually yesterday when I was looking back on it. I heard someone talking about it, and you look back on it and say, wow. And that's hurling intelligence. And that's something I really, really admire, that you have the awareness of what's going on around you to do that. But it was tough conditions for hurling. And like I said there, Limerick, it's hard to know, because we said they needed an injection of youth. They put that in. There was a few new guys in there. I'm not so sure, maybe would that kind of game be right up Dan Morrissey's alleyway? I thought he's a guy that's very good for them. But all in all, look, I think with where maybe the question marks over Limerick, I think Colm and myself were doing this a couple of weeks ago, and the night that they ran amok against Galway, and we were raving about them. We said, God, they looked rejuvenated. They looked invigorated again. And we'll get to Galway in a second, that maybe it was down to how poor Galway were. But Limerick are just, I suppose, what jumps out at me is it's probably Mother Nature catching up on a few of these guys. That same level of motivation that has driven them since 2017 into 18 is just probably drying up with some lads. And you're talking percentages here, very small percentages. And maybe just that energy that they always play with just wasn't as it always was. But I just still thought Cian Lynch, his ball handling in horrible conditions was excellent. Adam English and young Darren McCarthy, to summarise there, I thought he done really, really well for a young guy at 20 years of age who's had to play 2 matches where he has hurled with under-20s earlier in the week. I thought he done very, very well.
Yeah, Colin, what's your assessment of Limerick? It's interesting, they get kind of a break week now, and then they have Clare on a Saturday night then in 2 weeks' time. So and probably not an ideal time to get your break just after one match, but like, where do you assess them? You know, kind of what Eddie said, Mother Nature catching up with a couple of guys versus an infusion of 2-6 from play from Shane O'Brien and Adam English.
Yeah, I thought those two were particularly good. They've been around a while. Adam English has been on the squad since 2021. Colin Coughlin has been there since late 2020. Probably Cathal O'Neill was missing from the game, but he's another one. So it takes longer, to break into a team that has been so successful. So they've been around, they've plenty of experience. Shane O'Brien is a powerful player, obviously, and he has such a touch and such a turn. I think we saw that with some of his scores. So the changes Limerick made, I felt, worked for them. Thought William O'Donoghue did well. Obviously, Jake Morris scored a lot and scored freely, and the pace he can apply from centre forward is something that is working well for Tipperary too. And I think the changes that Liam Cahill has made, the broader changes to the Tipperary team, Owen Conley was stretched at times. He wasn't always picking up Shane O'Brien in one-to-ones for those scores. He was stretched, but he did well at times, and I think the points he scored, the long-range frees he scored, well, there's an asset for Tipperary that they mightn't have had. It might just relieve a little bit of the pressure on Darragh McCarthy too. Playing Darragh McCarthy so much is obviously, it's a risk, but it's a risk they have to take because he missed a couple of frees. And what impressed me about him was one of those frees in the second half that he missed, he came straight back out and scored one from play. So he strikes me as a player that has real temperament. And I think players that maybe have been suffering from confidence maybe in Tipperary for the last few years, probably the likes of Morris and Jason Ford and players like that, I think they will lift from in the presence of a young man, 19, 20 years of age, really able to step up and absorb a blow and go again. The blow of maybe missing a free he was expected to score didn't faze him at all. He still pulled over the last one. He scored that from play. So I think having young players like that, Sam O'Farrell too, who's willing to throw himself around there so much, I think that's lifted Tipperary in a way. I think their team is better structured. Michael Breen in the full back line, he's been a real, he's been such a powerful physical force against some of the better some of the better attackers there. Robert Doyle has done well there as well. So structurally, they're in a better position than they were a year ago. That's for sure. Structurally, they've brought a lot. I think Limerick, the break will suit Gearóid Hegarty. He had obviously some issues during the league. Didn't really catch fire the last day. That's a player they need to really step up, and he brings something different. He draws opponents. He draws a lot of opponents in around him. And I think Aaron Gillan had his moments, but I think there's more in him as well. Maybe a lot of the ball went in around Shane O'Brien. But I think Hegarty and Tom Morrissey will be the two that they will be looking to get a bit more out of.
It's interesting just looking at the break weeks generally. So Cork play again this weekend and they have 2 weeks off before they play Limerick. So it's like every team has different kind of schedules naturally when it's 5 teams in the competition, but it's just interesting when the various breaks come for each team and what momentum they might have going into them. We could talk about Munster hurling all day, Eddie, and as much as I'd like to, I want to get your opinion on Leinster as well. Kilkenny, I suppose, clearly the class of the Leinster Championship, it appears, 3-24-21 against Galway. They were a good bit better for the majority. What was your assessment of how Kilkenny played?
They probably didn't really have to overstretch themselves because Galway never brought the fire. They never brought the challenge that I expected from Galway. And I touched on it earlier on, and myself and Colm were spoken about this, and Colm made the point that he felt Galway, I think, were in a place where they should be concerned. And I felt, that Micheál Donoghue was putting his focus really on this match. But I think I'd have to agree with Colm now. I think you look through that Galway team, you look to their go-to players, they're not changing. There's not young lads stepping up. He went for a kind of a structure there, and, we spoke about this earlier on. But the one thing that I always experienced from Galway down through the years, whenever they beat us, I think of 2001, I think 2005, you think 2012 when they went at Kilkenny. They brought fire, they brought aggression, they brought edge. And again, unfortunately, I was waiting for that. I was waiting for a spark because there was a real heaven and hell aspect to this. And yeah, it's not recoverable, as we said. It's not the same tax going to come with it as Munster. But at the same time, Micheál Donoghue who left Kilkenny on Saturday evening, and I'd say he's concerned because there was no mojo about them. Kilkenny, I think they didn't have to be good, but they were quite good at the same time. The backs were on cue. I thought Mikey Butler's form was back on song. He absolutely put Conor Whelan in his pocket. Conor Whelan didn't look anyway himself for whatever reason. He looked a bit flat. And again, you're looking at bringing in Conor Cooney again, who, was right behind the goal. He's a lucky boy. He's a lucky boy because that was a I would class it as a nasty shot of Mikey Butler. And again, regardless of the jerseys involved, the act itself, when a guy is going for a ball and is fixed on nothing else and you blindside someone, you can do a serious injury to them. But Conor Cooney's form, unfortunately, and he's on the road a long time, and there's probably big expectations of him. He never really made an impact when he came in. But I think, to be fair to Kilkenny, the work rate was good all through. One little concern I suppose I would have is that, Owen Cody got an incredible goal in the second half. But up to that, he's a guy, I think, he had a serious illness. I think he had pneumonia going back a while ago, and he looked completely out of sorts in that match. And the odd little cameo here and there, and it's just, he's a guy that's very important to Kilkenny, but I think his work rate really needs to improve for Kilkenny, because Kilkenny are obviously looking at down the line. They want to get their business done, get TJ Reid back into that team, but I think it's that work rate, and I think others brought great work rate the other night, and that was probably the difference. But all in all, like I said, Kilkenny are going to the next match with 2 points in the bag and a healthy profit in terms of scoring average, but still not probably tested as much as Derek Wing would have liked. You take the win, you move on, you drive on. But definitely, I think he'd have liked a stiffer test.
Yeah, Colm, like a marked contrast to what we saw in Munster, and I suppose it's a bit of a barstool question, but like watching Kilkenny play and be so dominant against Galway, where would Kilkenny rank in Munster right now, from what you've seen?
I think they'd be...
Would they be top three?
I think they'd be pretty close to top three, I would think.
No, Eddie, you think?
I think they'd be...
No, just below it, but...
I think they'd be challenging the third team, along with Tipperary and whoever else is dropping off into third. And you would have said, based on league form, that's Clare, but Clare delivered a second half performance last. But I think it's around there. I think they'd be taxed, really troubled to get the third place year on year in Munster. Whereas, you beat Galway, they're a long way into a final now. And as Eddie said, they didn't really have to extend themselves. But I feel Kilkenny have, and I don't know whether you'd agree with this, Eddie. I just think where they probably lose out is the depth of their reserves at the moment. I think they have a strong 15. If everybody presents themselves fit and well, you get John Donnelly back. But if you get, like, they beat Galway, and this should be alarming for Galway now, that they lost by 12 points to a team that didn't have TJ Reid and lost Adrian Mullen very early on, and Shane Murphy as well. And, when you're going down to the 19, 20, 21st Kilkenny player, the graph it declines steeper than maybe the other top teams. I would feel at the moment Kilkenny are not blessed with the reserves that they once had, or anything like it. But I do think they have a strong 15. I mean, just looking at Hugh Lawler last Saturday again, what a fullback, what a turn of pace that man has. He really gets out in front. You say every time he goes for a ball, you just think he's going to get it. No matter what, he's going to angle his body in such a way, and he clears it. He comes out and he clears it. So the defence did play very well. Michael Carey's been having a very, very good season. Richie Reid was back. I thought his distribution was great. But again, he had time to pick his spot, and the receivers had time to run into a lot of space that was there. Galway have lost heavily now to Tipperary in the league, early on, Limerick, Cork, and now Kilkenny. And I'm looking at the Galway team, and you're not seeing anything new. And it was a problem that Henry Shefflin had as well. And, maybe it was said that he wasn't bringing players through quick enough. The bottom line is that the players to bring through in Galway may not just be there. and that's the hand that they have. John Fleming was in, and he had his moments. But really, Eddie, I didn't see anything new in Galway. Nothing at all.
And Eddie, just before you jump in, since Kilkenny last won the Minor All-Ireland Championship in 2014, Galway have won it 5 times. So just to hear you both say how there's nothing new, it does jar with what... I know minors no guarantee of senior success.
Yeah.
Even we saw with Kerry and their bounty of minors, it didn't actually translate to huge amount of guys coming through, as many as you might think. But it's still a pretty stark statistic when you read it.
It is, and therein lies the issue. I mean, that's the challenge probably for Galway. I think that has been going on in Galway quite some time. That they're just wondering how come, with all the underage success, they're still not able to bring through a consistent flow of lads that are year on year knocking the door in for All-Ireland final appearances and what have you. And I know, look, through 12, through 15 and all that, they were knocking on the door, 17, 18. But they probably haven't produced a player like Joe Canning, that type of ilk, to complement Conor Whelan. They have a few young light fellas there, Declan McLaughlin, and Fleming, I thought, went well for the first half, and then he just seemed to fade out of it a little bit. But for whatever it is, they're producing, I suppose, nice hurlers, but they're not producing a hotshot forward, in a little while. And I suppose, look, turn around and Colm touched on it, even ourselves, our bench, we haven't that, hotshot forwards that you need, like the Shane O'Brien's, what Cork have done, what Clare have done on the back of, a success or two. So that's the challenge. And I agree, absolutely, the Kilkenny bench is probably thin on the ground when you're looking at that quality impact, which some of the, you'd have to say that's where Cork, Limerick and Clare, are probably ahead of the rest in that regard. But Kilkenny have a very good 15 on the day when they're all fully fit. And I think I would have felt the last couple of seasons, what was probably doing Kilkenny in was they weren't getting those big matches, those 8 out of 10 performances consistently from, Mullen, Cody, Billy Ryan, John Donnelly. John Donnelly was excellent for Kilkenny last year. Cian Kenny and them. So the more of them that they can get up to that level to supplement and take the pressure off your TJ Reid. And like I said, Owen Cody has to get up there as well. To me, he's a guy, it's a big season for him. So that's what Kilkenny need if they're to succeed, because like you said there isn't that success, but or there isn't that quality of that injection of quality. But coming back to Galway, I would think now that there's a few teams in Leinster and they're definitely kind of looking at Galway now in a real way, saying they're just something missing at the moment and they're vulnerable.
Yeah, so Colm, what would you say is the pecking order behind Kilkenny? So the other 2 games over the weekend, we had Wexford 224, Antrim 19 points, Leitrim hitting 16 points, 12 frees and 4 from play, and then Dublin 125, Offaly 219. It was very much in the balance. A Ronan Hayes goal in the latter stages kind of got Dublin over the line. So it's a bit of flux underneath Kilkenny. Like Galway were probably perceived to be the second best team, but after what we saw at the weekend, what way are you looking at the rest of the best of the rest?
They're perceived to be the second best team. It's an act of faith with Galway every year, and that faith is slowly eroding when you look at the league performance and you look at Kilkenny look at the Kilkenny game last Saturday. And I think Eddie suggested there the lack of fight has to be a concern, because whatever about the players coming through, Kilkenny just had it so easy for long spells of that game, really without any significant contest. After the first quarter, it became all too easy for them. So the pecking order, look, you'd still say Galway have the hurlers that Cathal Mannion and Conor Whelan on form on a better day can elevate them to a different level. That's for sure. But Dublin obviously. Dublin have a very good record against Wexford in the round robin. Wexford, since the round robin, they've obviously played 5 times, and Wexford have only won once. There's been a draw in between, so they have a little edge on Wexford there. But Lee Chin and Rory O'Connor, no more than Mannion and Whelan, really brings something to Wexford that can really drag them to places where they maybe ordinarily shouldn't be. Those two in particular. So I don't think there's very much. I think Kilkenny are a distance ahead of everything else in Leinster. But I have a suspicion Wexford can come strong and have a better. They've had some bad results against Antrim and Westmeath in recent years, but they've always been able to pick themselves up. And while they may lose a game, I think themselves and Galway, I think, are probably just maybe ahead of Dublin. That's my suspicion of it.
Yeah, Eddie, like at this juncture, it looks like Kilkenny plus 3 Munster in the All Ireland semi-finals. Is there any other Leinster team you could see forcing their way in, and like, be it Wexford, Dublin, or if Galway can recover from what their opening defeat?
Yeah, the Leinster Championship, like we said, there by contrast offers the opportunities, and if you can turn around and get it right for a day, you can suddenly change your fortunes. But I would, again, with Colm, I would have been looking at that from coming in from the outside. You'd have said I felt it was Dublin, was the team that might lose out, but you'd say very much they have a good opportunity now. And I think the only is that at the end is that they have to go to Galway in the last match, so that's going to be obviously a key match, possibly for staying in the championship. Kilkenny have to go to Wexford Park. It's what happens in between. Kilkenny now have to kick on and make sure that they take care of business next weekend, and they're all but assured that. But yeah, the worry for, like, there is opportunities, but Galway, I think the big thing that Micheál Donoghue would have been going away with is just the psychology of his players and where they're at, because how they weren't motivated and ready for Nolan Park. Because in Kilkenny, generally for the last week or so, we would have been apprehensive about this match, because Kilkenny are at a crossroads too, in where they are, and Derek Ling as well. Where they go from here, they need to kick on, and there was a worry that, well, what are we going to be like for the Galway match? And they answered it quite well, that they were up for it. But the problem was, like I said, we didn't get the test that you get a real feel for where they are, and the reality is that they'll get tests of sorts other places, particularly at the back end of it. But like I said there, I think the jury is still out a little bit, but Kilkenny do look to be that bit ahead of them. It's going to be then what happens elsewhere. But Galway need to pick it up, and I think that's the one thing for me is Micheál Donoghue, is his body language of his players there Saturday night. Like, they never really looked like they believed it could be Kilkenny, or that they really, really wanted to be Kilkenny. And that's a big concern if you're a manager.
And it was Kilkenny added the goals late on, the 2 late goals. You would say, right, it might fall to Galway to dress up the scoreboard a little bit, that they'd be the ones hunting goals at the end. But it was Kilkenny who actually went away in the end, and that's not a good sign. To me, it looked as if they checked out with 10 or 15 minutes to go and said, look, we'll look to Tullamore next week, and that wasn't a great sign for Galway at all.
Certainly not. It'll be interesting to see how they bounce back. Just to finish up, Colm, Waterford, I asked you off air, trying to decide who the draws suited this weekend. You could say them. They watched all the 2 games, no team pulling away with 2 early points. If they get a win, I think they're the first game. They go top of the table this Sunday. What should we expect from them? They host Clare, Walsh Park. It'll be a small ground. It'll be a tigerish atmosphere. Huge opportunity for them now to kind of put their foot forward.
Yeah, Peter Queally was there with Dan Shanahan in the stand in Ennis last Sunday, watching it all unfold. Look, they looked good against Offaly in the Division 1B league final in Cork a few weeks back. They've just been back from a camp. They've picked up after a very bad start in the league, but obviously Clare coming in with that point and that second half performance, in the knowledge that if we win this game and then we beat Tipperary, huge opportunity there now for Clare to ensure one of the 3 places and do it probably, I think, comfortably. So I think Clare will be buoyed by what they did. They struggled with Waterford and Ennis last year. It's a different set of circumstances. I do think with the game behind them, and especially that second half, they're going to be formidable. There's a lot of Clare players who can pick it up. David Fitzgerald was a little bit peripheral last week. He was one of their better players last year. I think there's more in him. I think there's more in Mark Rogers. I thought he was a little bit peripheral too. Okay, he set up the goal just after half time for Aidan McCarthy. So I think there's more in those 2 players, and I think they'll bring it. Tony Kelly had a very good game last Sunday. But Tony Kelly can always do more again. So I think there's improvement in the half back line for Clare as well. Obviously, Diarmuid Ryan went off. John Conlon was very much in trouble early on against Dara Fitzgibbon, but he recovered, and you'd expect with that game behind them there's going to be significant improvement in Clare, and I think enough to deal with Waterford.
Well, on paper, looks set to be an unbelievably exciting second weekend after that epic on Easter Sunday. For now, Colm, Eddie, thanks so much for joining me.